Hello and welcome to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this special podcast episode, we'll talk with military personnel who were stationed in Vietnam and talk with them about their extraordinary experiences. This podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's special guests. Our guests today are Jan Scruggs and Dennis Haines, who served in the Vietnam War. Jan Scruggs conceived the idea of building a memorial to Vietnam veterans. He founded the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, which built the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. The wall, as it is known, is visited by over 5 million persons yearly. Dennis Haines served in Vietnam with the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. He started initially as a radio man, then an M60 machine gunner team squad leader. While approaching a suspected Viet Cong-occupied village, he was struck in the head with 2 enemy-fired rounds that changed his life forever. Here now is Jan Scruggs to begin the conversation.
Thank you, Saigon Steve. I'm here with Dennis Haines. How did you end up in Vietnam? We all ended up there for different reasons, and how did you end up there?
I looked at my options if I would have volunteered. Air Force was 4 years. I think the Army was 3 if you volunteered. So I just decided to write it out and see if I'd get drafted, which of course I did. And the same day I showed up for my physical, at the end of that day I was on a plane headed to Fort Benning.
I note that you and I are both veterans of the 199th Light Infantry Brigade.
Yep.
When I got there in 1969, we were sort of still charged with the defense of Saigon, but we moved north to a place called Swan Loc. But you were there. What month did you get to Vietnam?
March of '68. So we were still chasing the bad guys out of the south.
Yes, there was a lot of heavy fighting, and your primary weapon was the M60 machine gun. Is that correct?
Yes.
So why don't you tell me what happened? I'm sure you've told the story about 100 times. You went to a Viet Cong village, a village that appeared to be Viet Cong and related or sympathizers. So what happened on that day?
I'd done a recon patrol down in that area earlier in the day because my squad was supposed to be the lead squad on that operation that night. We were doing a cordon, which is to circle the village, and then the next morning MAC-V and some South Vietnamese were going to come through and go door to door. But that night we went down the road. It wasn't quite dark yet, and our CO told me to put flank security out on both sides, which I did, of this main dike, which was about the width of a road. And myself and John Miller went off to the right side, which was toward the village. And that was the way I was going to start out to circle it. And I told my guys that were back on the main dike to just hold up till they got the go-ahead to move out and then come into John and I. I told John, because we were both minus sleep for quite a while, and I told John if he needs to, he can lay down and catch some Z's. And at the same time, I remember hearing some rustling in the hooch, which was right in front of us. When I was there, I had my M16 by my side for being squad leader. I gave up the 60, and I heard some wrestling in front of me, and that got my attention. I got up on my knees, which was probably the wrong thing to do, because the next thing I remember seeing is a bright flash, which I think was the muzzle flash of an AK-47 and fell backwards into a rice paddy that had some water in it. And John Miller, whom I just got reunited with here about 5 years ago, told me that it wasn't just one guy that shot. There was all kind of automatic weapons fire going on, and even had an incoming RPG. So there was quite a lot of enemy in that village. Where they were at during the day, I don't know, but John jumped in and to help to keep my head out of the water so that it wouldn't get a lot of that gunk in there. And I was laying there conscious for a while.
Yeah.
That John was holding me, and I remember him saying, "Here come some of the guys from the squad coming in," and they told me to hang on. The chopper would be there in probably less than 15 minutes. And I remember being pulled sideways up onto the stretcher because it was higher. That has those little feet and all four corners being pulled up. I could feel the sidebar of the stretcher going up under my back. And
Right.
After that, I must have went into unconsciousness because next thing I remember, I woke up in the 24th Evac hospital. I was not awake long enough to really identify anyone. I just know that I woke up while it was there and found my right hand tied to the side of the bed. I don't remember the helicopter ride from the field to the 24th Evac. I don't remember being offloaded, so I must have been unconscious. That's where I came into contact with Dr. John Baldwin, and it just so happened that he was not operating on anyone that night. He had 14 head injuries come in that evening, and he was
You were hit with a bullet?
Yeah, AK-47.
And you were hit in the head?
Yes, I was. The right side of my head, which paralyzed me on my left side, so I'm a hemiplegic, they call me.
And today, are you still paralyzed?
Yes.
You have a wheelchair, and that's kind of how you get along?
Yeah, I can walk and get along, but I stumble more than I get walking done, so I stick to the wheelchair. It's less chance of falling, and I don't need any more problems than I already got.
I can't tell you how much I admire you, and what you've been through is awful. A lot of people couldn't deal with it, but you do such a great job of inspiring people. You are an example of a patriot. You volunteer your services to the Veterans Administration, and you help bring people up who are down. So it's really important that you keep up that good work.
Yeah, you saw me at the ceremonies.
Yes, ceremonies, at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I used to be the MC and the CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. That was way back. But I always noticed you because you had that little 199th patch there. And you see these hero welcomes coming for these Iraq veterans and Afghanistan veterans. How does that make you feel?
I feel like I was cheated because we never got the welcome home like that. It was sad the way we came back and people were really kind of against us. I just think it's great that they get the welcome home that they're getting. I just wish we could have had a little bit of that. Maybe not to the degree that they have. Yeah. Just a nice pat on the back and a welcome home would have been sufficient.
Would have gone a long way. Well, what we did with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, is all my idea, was we said, look, we're going to separate the war from the warrior. You can be against the war, but let's not be against these guys like you and I who just did our duty for the country. And that turned out just fine. We got a great deal of support. Now 5 million plus people a year come to see it. Internationally, it's a great. I
know, that's amazing.
How do you keep from being bitter about the plate that life has served you?
Well, I keep myself pretty busy, and I really don't have time to reflect on that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I never do, because when there are times when I am down, that I reflect on that. But for the most part, I try to be positive.
Well, again, you inspire so many people by being there at these ceremonies, by shaking people's hands and talking to them. It's just very, very much appreciated. And now let's turn it over to Saigon Steve, who has a few questions for Dennis Haines.
Dennis Haines, you were in the light infantry, which is basically you go everywhere the helicopters take you. You have no fixed address, right?
No, we didn't. We were pretty much what I call air assault.
So you are out living in the jungle during the night? You're not going back to any kind of a base, is that correct?
No, we slept under our ponchos every night.
They tell me that at nighttime you see tigers, snakes, spiders.
Well, you never knew what was going to be crawling up on you at night. I think I got bit or stung by something because I was medevac to the rear early on in my tour over there, and it just came up fever of unknown origin. So I think something bit me. That's just the way it was. And of course, we had a battle with leeches because we were mostly in the paddies. A few times we were actually north of the paddies where we were pretty much on dry land. We were in the pineapple region. We were up in the rubber plantations. We were in the sugarcane plantations. So we were pretty much all over the place.
Well, it's been said when you're there in the very first 30 days, you are really attuned to noise and visual things happening. What's that like? You're really not sleeping soundly when you're in that kind of a mode, right?
No, you're not. Everyone had a chance at pulling what we called maybe 2 hours of watch every night because we had to call in on the radio every hour on the hour a SITREP, which was a situation report. And so that's what I said. And even the night that I was wounded, my buddy and I had both been without sleep for a pretty long period of time, and pretty soon you just get used to that. We used to crash during the day, because during the day we'd come in the morning at sunrise back to the base camp, or at least the forward base camp, and then during the day we'd catch some Z's because we had people in the bunkers, pulling guard.
You started out as a radio man. What are the duties of a radio man?
Okay, well, I carried the radio at first for the platoon, which I carried it for a first lieutenant, I think it was, and it was pretty much just communication between battalion and the platoon, or even from the company commander to the platoon, and of course I was used if we had to call in artillery. I was the one that repeated the coordinates to the artillery base camp.
Were those radios big with battery backpacks and things of that nature?
Oh yeah. In fact, the ones that we carried were mounted to the rucksack frame, and it was pretty heavy. I forget what they weighed, but it was a good, I'm going to say 50 pounds anyway.
And they have a very long antenna. I believe your antenna was hit by enemy fire.
Yeah, it was. That was the day my buddy Jack was killed. I got to Vietnam in March, and not long after I was there, I met a guy from Mountville, which is geographically from where I live, maybe about 30 miles away in Pennsylvania here. And he was killed. That was our first, my first combat. In fact, I received the Combat Infantry Award for that action that day. But he was killed, and that was a pretty tough moment because we lived so close to each other geographically. We became real good friends. It was just really tough. My first, and of course that was an air assault deal too. We lost a track there, an APC. They were ambushed as they were rolling through the village. This was the aluminum APCs, and a B-40 rocket launcher literally melted the side of the APC because they had gotten rid of their M16s and took up AK-47s, which they seemed to have a good supply of ammo for those, and it literally melted the weapons to the side of the APC inside. So we knew when we were flown in there was the hot LZ. We were drawing fire as we got off the helicopters that day and worked our way in toward the village. Of course, my first contact with enemy fire, I was kind of beside myself. And my platoon sergeant was to my right. I'm laying there face down, trying to stay below the weapons fire coming from the village. And all of a sudden he says, "Everybody up, we're going to do a frontal assault." And in my mind, I'm thinking, we're going to do what? And he said, "Come on, Haines, get up, let's go." So we did, and luckily we made it the whole way into where the bunkers were and dodged some enemy fire that day. But I did notice that when they opened up on Jack later that day, I had a chance to assess my equipment, and I had a notch in my antenna about 6 inches above my head.
You know, when you take basic training, they try to train you for combat, but does that training kick in when you're under that first attack?
I don't think it would have kicked in had it not been for the platoon sergeant, because he had been there for a while, so this wasn't his first dance, and he was able to keep everybody together and have us move in. And eventually we took over the bunkers and blew them one by one. I was never so scared in all my life as what I was when all of a sudden bullets were coming our way. And it's just an experience. You can train for it, but you're never really prepared for it.
Can you actually see human figures firing at you, or is it just muzzle shots?
Just muzzle flash. No, I'll tell you what, the portholes that they had to fire out of were so narrow, I'm going to say maybe 2-3 inches.
So they're just firing at random. They really can't zero in on anybody. It's just
no.
If you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, that's it, right?
Yeah. No, my buddy that was killed, he was kind of like right in front of them. So, I mean, there was no doubt that they saw there was someone there that they fired at.
So the bottom line, after that engagement with the enemy, were the enemy destroyed during that firefight?
Well, yeah, what happened was we ended up blowing all the bunkers with C4 and grenades, and then we didn't know for sure that we got them all, so we pulled back from that village and had an F4 come in and drop some armaments to really blow it up. And then that evening we set up on a big dike right outside of that village, and the lead squad, I forget which squad that was, platoon I should say, they saw some movement and some of the bad guys trying to work their way out of the village and get out of there. So we didn't get them all, and we had a 90 millimeter recoilless rifle that was in that lead element. They loaded a beehive round and fired it toward where these guys were walking out of. I don't know that we got, if we got any of them, there was no evidence except that there was blood on the ground because they pulled them all into spider holes, and we never found bodies. Although we did go back in the following day then and had to pull bodies out of the bunkers.
Dennis Haines, you were in country for 9 months. During that time, how many firefights do you think you were in?
Oh my gosh. I mean, like I say, we were always going to help the guys that were already in trouble with the enemy. So I'm going to say at least a dozen.
So your light brigade was almost like a SWAT team, right?
Yeah, really. I mean, we didn't carry the rucksacks. We carried mainly just water, ammunition, and that was about it. The rucksacks got left behind, and they were flown into us if we were set up anywhere of sort of a permanent site, or maybe we'd be for a couple of days to a week. But yeah, we got there to where we were needed, either one way or the other. If it wasn't by helicopter, it was rag boat or APCs.
So when you were dispatched You knew you were going into a firefight. It wasn't just a reconnaissance mission.
Oh yeah, and more than not, it was usually a hot LZ, which means we were drawing fire as we were going into the landing zone.
And what does that do to your mindset that you know you're going into hell?
I'll tell you what, in the beginning I was scared to death, but after a while you just pray to God that you're going to get through it and do whatever you got to do.
Well, Dennis Haines, we can't say enough to thank you for everything you did. You paid the price for being there, and all I can say is the country is grateful for it. And I'm a wordsmith, and I am really at a loss for words to say what I would like to say to you. The words just leave me. But the only thing I can say is, Dennis Haines, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, and that's very much appreciated. I wish we'd just had more of that when we came back. I ended up coming back then to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. That's where I was to serve out the rest of my time till they medically retired me.
Well, that wraps up another special episode of FUCAT Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future FUCAT Stories podcast, email your contact information to fucatstories@gmail.com. That's fucatstories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the FUCAT Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.